Hello everyone, welcome back to Kirby and the Forgotten Stove. Yes, you did leave it running. Go back, your house is now on fire. In this part, we finish off the fifth world? World 5? Yes. And beat the boss, so that's cool. One thing that I do want to point out about this point in the game is that, like Kirby games before it, this game is fairly easy. I would actually say that overall this is probably the easiest Kirby game they've made in the past the past 10 or so years, aside from Star Allies, which is
almost brain dead. So,
yeah. So but I feel like that's intentional because for the most part, 3D platformers tend to be easier than 2D platformers. And also they purposefully tried to keep things simple for this. But I point that out just to say that this is the point of the game where I feel like the platforming does get more satisfyingly complex. I do think that the difficulty, again, not that this game should be hard, but I feel like it ramps up a little too slowly. This is the point where I find the actual jumping and traversal to be a very satisfying difficulty level. So that's good.
One thing I wanna say regarding difficulty in general, not necessarily as it relates to Kirby, is that I think a lot of gamers overemphasize the part of challenge in games where the game is actually really hard for players to play, and underemphasize the importance of challenge just being enough, where the player is engaged but not necessarily stymied.
Yeah.
I mean, I felt that way a little bit with the recently the Resident Evil 4 remake, where I felt it was a little too hard early on.
Yeah, well, I will say, for something like Resident Evil 2 remake, where if it is that challenging, you can just turn down the difficulty. I think it's fine for the game's base challenge level to be quite difficult, and it's not like they didn't have an eye for it being too hard in some aspects, because some parts of the game are actually easier than the original. The water room, for example, I remember that being an absolute nightmare in the original game, and it actually wasn't too bad.
The original game has this thing, right, where if you screw up enough times, there just will suddenly stop being as many enemies in a room or whatever. And so
as long as you're not playing professional mode, yes.
The dynamic difficulty scaling, yes. Sometimes it will just gauge how much ammo and stuff you have and give you something based on what it thinks you need. And sometimes enemies will just inexplicably have less health. But Resident Evil 4 Remake's a bit more determined in its difficulty level, I think. But not to get sidetracked from my original point. My original point was that challenge in a game isn't there specifically. Well, it isn't always there specifically to be challenging. Sometimes it's just a vital aspect of what keeps the player's brain engaged while they're playing.
That's a really good way to put it, because I noticed this a lot with puzzle games recently, since the 3DS eShop closed down a week ago at the time of this recording. RIP 3DS eShop, F's in the chats. No F's in the chat for Wii U eShop. Let that thing die a terrible death. I don't care.
Okay, what about Xenoblade X?
What about Xenoblade X? You know what? That is actually a legitimate concern, because that's one of the 4 Wii U games that haven't been brought over or don't have a suitable replacement. It's like that, and
they'll probably port Xenoblade X at some point. It's the only game that hasn't been ported yet, so they'll do it on a rainy day, so to speak.
So my point, puzzle games. Puzzle games are all about keeping the brain engaged. And one thing that can become very possible with a puzzle game once you get into the mid game, is that your brain turns off because you kind of intrinsically understand how all the puzzles work, and so it's going against what the whole point of what the puzzle game should be, which is to keep your mind engaged. It's a balance of keeping you thinking versus keeping you stumped, which is very, very hard to do. in terms of game design. And you kind of think about it too in terms of a lot of games where I wouldn't say that like Super Mario World is a particularly challenging game, but part of what makes it good is that it's never so easy that you stop having to try, and having to try is a very important part of keeping the experience fun, because you're putting yourself into the game and then you're getting more out of it as a result of that. Which I think is just a more awkward way of saying what Lewis originally said earlier. So,
Well, I mean, the difference between a game being like super duper hard, like Soulsborne hard or whatever, and a game just being, a fair challenge comes most often in the form of the gameplay being complex enough that you're constantly having to think of slightly new ways to approach things. We were talking about Resident Evil 4 Remake, but like both versions of Resident Evil 4, original and remake, have this quality where even though basically all you're doing throughout the game is fighting Ganados and stuff, it's always throwing you into new situations where you fight Ganados with different configurations of enemy and level design and different new harebrained scenarios that you have to navigate through. And every time it does that, it means you have to approach the same general gameplay in a new way. You have to think of something of some new combination of the tools you have on hand to overcome that challenge. So even on like the normal modes where it's not like super hard, especially in the original game where normal mode isn't super hard, you can think of like, from moment to moment, every moment, you're making new decisions about how to approach the same situation you've been playing through the entire time, because it's just getting a little bit more complicated, or the complication is headed in a slightly new direction. It's actually part of the reason that I prefer the remake over the original, is that on normal mode, sometimes the game gets into a sort of rhythm where that decision-making process is a bit gimped, and the enemies are a bit too stupid, and it becomes a bit too easy to just camp a narrow choke point and shoot them in the face and do melee kicks over and over.
I actually have seen very little of the Resident Evil 4 remake. How different is it from the original? Because I know that like 2 and 3 remakes substantially changed several aspects of how
the answer is yes and no.
Well,
Yes
I
and
would
no.
say it's more similar to the original game than Resident Evil 2 Remake was, and it has a lot more of the original game's content than Resident Evil 3 Remake did. Thank God. But it's also like, it's not afraid to drop an area that was awkward or focused a bit too much on quick time events. It's not afraid to replace the areas that it dropped with some slightly new content. And the combat is substantially different because Leon has way more movement options and way more tools at his disposal than he used to.
You also can't just knife everything to death.
Yeah, well,
Not with that attitude.
the knife
the knife
has
literally breaks. So
the knife has durability now, and your main combat knife is an item that you have to repair with the merchant. Although you can find smaller, less durable kitchen knives and boot knives as enemy drops or as things you can find in the environment to.
also,
hold
you missed the last
yourself
Yeah.
beat by like a few pixels.
Yeah.
over. Dang it.
Yeah.
And this is what editing is for.
Yeah, because then, well, that's honestly the good thing about this game, and this is actually something that I noticed about Yoshi too, in Yoshi's Woolly World specifically, because this is a problem the other Yoshi games have, is that if you miss one thing, you have to, in order to get 100%, you have to collect everything in like the original Yoshi's Island and whatnot. In this, the levels are like 3 minutes long if you're not looking for stuff, so you can just like zoom straight to the end if you miss something at the very end like that, which I appreciate. For the record, I'm not a huge fan of having to do a perfectionist run every single time in order to get the super de-duper rank or to unlock everything or whatever. At least in a game like this, in a game where that's like more the point, like, well, Sonic games really aren't about this kind of exploration a lot of the time, but I feel like there also aren't that many Sonic games where you have to like find all the things in one run? Like, is there a... oh, wait, Sonic Advance 2 and its stupid special ring shit. Fuck that. Fuck that shit.
Yeah, that was kind of like... In Sonic Advance 3, they at least let you find one in one run and another in another run until you have them all.
I thought that in Sonic Advance 3 you had to find, like, the little chows, and that's what opened the special stages.
Yeah, but you don't have to do it all in one run, is my point.
Oh. I don't think I ever opened a single special stage in Sonic Advance 2 or 3. And I played those games a decent amount as a kid.
It was hard enough finding them in Sonic Advance 1, where there was exactly one special spring in the level, and you had to find that one special spring.
I mean, it was easier because you didn't have to do them as Sonic, so you could, like, do a snail's pace run as Tails or Knuckles, and you would be fine.
Yeah, but that's no fun.
I mean, it's not really, but that's kind of just the...
It reminds me of the way I used to approach the special stages in Sonic Heroes, where I would just do them all as Team Rose.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean,
it was
but
it's easier like, that way.
Yeah, but it's not like the special stages in any of these games are a highlight, so it's not like, you know, you're depriving yourself of something.
Well,
you know,
I mean...
Like, they're not fun either way.
They could be, if they, one, made the special stages just a little bit better, and two, made the process of finding them rewarding in itself. The Sonic 3 and Knuckles Sonic Mania system is still the best, because finding those special rings all around the level, there's so many of them, you're going to find them, and then you're going to find more. And even if after you finish the special stages and have all the emeralds, finding a special ring means you get a 50 ring bonus.
What happens if you find a special spring in Sonic Advance if you already have all the emeralds?
I don't know.
I don't think anything happens.
Okay. Like, I mean, it's not that different from how Sonic 3 does it, because it's just more stingy. There's, like, one per zone, I think. So it's like, it's the same kind of, if you look hard enough, you'll find it. But I do agree in that only having one means that you basically have to scour the area in a not very Sonic way. In order to find them, versus like, oh, you happen to see something interesting and then you look for it and then there is one, you know, which fits more with the brand, so to speak, where you're not tiptoeing through a Sonic stage looking for every secret. If you see one, you look for it and then there it is. It's a subtle but important difference.
And finding more means more opportunities to get emeralds early. So, you know, you're rewarded for how much exploration you do and how much you successfully pull it off. But okay, so to the game we're actually talking about for a change.
Resident Evil 4 or Kirby?
Don't get me... I want to talk about Resident Evil 4 at length, but I'm trying to hold off until we actually do the commentary. We'll
talk about it now, because I'm only going to show up in the last 40 parts after being asleep for half the time, if we're trying to keep true to the spirit of things. Gosh.
What will the HD version of Ronald Ray Quill look like?
You see, YouTube's old auto-sub feature is just the original ChatGPT.
Look, if it's anything like what Resident Evil 4 Remake is actually like, Ronald Rayquell will get 12 times as much screen time and have a much better developed character than his original incarnation. So
nice. Good on you, Ronald Rayquell.
In other words, Google Translate will actually work.
Is the stupid statue thing still in Resident Evil 4 Remake?
You mean of Salazar?
Yeah.
Yes and no. It doesn't chase you in a QuickTime event. They got rid of all the QuickTime events.
Well, I'm glad about that, at least, because when I finally played Resident Evil 4, one of the things that I did not appreciate is being used to putting my controller down for 10-minute cutscenes, and then suddenly dying because I'm supposed to know that there's a QuickTime event coming up halfway through the game. So, glad about that, at least.
Well, the statue sort of got merged into another existing room, so that it's a stationary obstacle in that specific room. For the better, I would say, because, frankly, how do I put this? The room that it exists in, I'm trying to say this without spoilers, is one of the most fun rooms in the game. Just because of all the stuff going on in that one room. And it's not strictly like a new room. It's more like it was merged with another room that already existed in the original game, kinda. And I think that's a good way to do remake content, is like, you know, sometimes new content is good, sometimes old content is good, or sometimes you can pull a Tomb Raider Anniversary and just merge two vaguely annoying things into one better thing.
I mean, I feel like with a straight shot-for-shot remake is not usually super exciting. Like, sometimes it can be. I'm honestly trying to think of, like, a straight point-for-point remake where it ended up, like, I guess, like, the 3DS versions of Ocarina of Time and Star Fox 64. Like, those look better, but they're not super exciting because they are basically the same game again.
Like, yeah, I mean, I'd still call the 3DS versions of Ocarina of Time, well, they changed up
people argue a lot about the Majora's Mask one on 3DS.
Yeah, the Majora's Mask one changed up some of the bosses and stuff, so there is a point to argue about that. It changed the bosses,
it changed Zora swimming for no particular reason whatsoever. The Bomber's Notebook is way more useful, though. It made some things better and it made some things worse, which is such a weird situation to be in for a game like that.
Worse, in big old air quotes, where I think the only people who think it's worse are people who are, like, not just people who played the original game, but people who got so used to the original game that going on to the new stuff is jarring.
No, Zora swimming is definitely worse.
Why is it worse?
You move like half the speed, from what I've seen.
That's not necessarily worse.
Well, in a game where you're crunched for time, it certainly doesn't help.
I don't know. It could just make swimming an interesting time management decision. I don't know.
It really doesn't.
Sometimes fast swimming just feels awkward to me, if that makes sense. Like, you're underwater. If you're going too fast, it stops feeling like you're underwater.
Well, I think the difference is that it's the Zora swimming specifically. So, like, Link's normal swimming is pretty goddamn slow. And then I haven't played the 3DS Majora's Mask. I've only played like half of the original. So like I never got to the point where you have the Zora Mask in the first place.
Like I should make myself clear for you and y'all in the comments. I'm not like straight up contesting that 3DS Zora swimming is superior. I'm saying like I haven't played 3DS Majora's Mask, at least not to the point where I get the Zora Mask anyway, and I don't necessarily know if they went a little too hard on slowing it down and made it just awkward to navigate around, or
it's the opinion of the vast majority of the people who have played the game that Zora swimming is worse because it's just too slow and not speedy enough.
Well, here in the post Resident Evil 4 remake world, I've become slightly cynical of the original is better because blah 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 crowd, because like the
same people who say that also admit that the Bomber's Notebook is better, and they're certainly the time management thing is better. It's not the original is better because of this. It's the remake did this worse but did these better.
Yeah.
So it's not like a Ocarina of Time 3D or Star Fox 64 3D where it's just functionally a better version.
Yeah, it's just, when it comes to the Resident Evil 4 remake, some people get oddly defensive. Hi, Sillydillo.
Sillydillo, this is like one of my favorite bosses in the game because he's just ridiculous.
Yeah.
But I mean, I do understand that people can get very defensive of their favorite games. And if you change something, it's like precious to them. But I would also say that in the sense of, like, let's say the Resident Evil 4 remake, the original doesn't disappear because the remake exists.
Especially the original. It's one of the most well-preserved games in existence.
Oh yeah, you can buy Resident Evil 4 for, I don't know, your fucking smart toaster. So it's again, it's not
literally
like,
there is a crusty old mobile version that would probably work on a toaster these days.
Yeah, so it's like, yeah, so when it comes to remakes, I generally prefer to be some sort of like spice or change added, but it also has to make sense. To bring the conversation back to Kirby for a second, They recently re-released Kirby's Return to Dreamland on Switch, which is good. It's a good remake of the game. Like, it looks nice. They added some mini games. That's neat. But the main adventure is nearly entirely untouched, aside from the kind of haphazard inclusion of 2 extra overpowered copy abilities. So I don't really get why they're there other than to just say that they added something. Because they don't feel natural at all. They just kind of, even the way the enemies that you use to get them feel like they're just kind of put in like they were put in with the Mario Maker kind of tool. And I'm not opposed to new content. Like, some of the previous Kirby remakes have been awesome with the content they added. Like, the Adventure remake and the Superstar remake especially do great jobs of adding stuff and making them feel different from their originals. But I just think that, like, having some sort of... Oh, well, I should say that the Dreamland remake did add the Magolor mode, which was a pretty cool addition, but that's also its own kind of sequestered thing. So it doesn't, like, impact the main story, really. So it's weird. It's just I don't understand why they chose that specific game to remake, because it's, like, fine.
I guess, like, my big thing is that I think people put too much emphasis on there being one perfect way to do remakes, whereas I think, like, basically all the methods that you could use to remake or reimagine a game are worthwhile in their own way and would apply differently to different titles. One of my favorite cases of a remake is actually Wild Arms 1, Wild Arms Alter Code F, where the original game and the remake are essentially 2 completely different games, because the Wild Arms 1 engine and the Wild Arms 3 engine are just that goddamn different. So they didn't bother trying a 1-to-1 remake. They just made 2 different games. They told the story in a different way, and they laid the game out in a different way. And in some ways, I prefer the original, and in some ways, I prefer the remake. But they're both their own experiences, and they're both worth playing. Play both games. Seriously, they're good. But, like...
I mean, I agree with you in the sense that it is nice when a remake doesn't completely invalidate the original, too. Because, like, I'm thinking of, like, some of the Dragon Quest remakes on DS, for example, where all 3 of those remakes basically invalidate the originals. There's no real reason to play Dragon Quest 4 on NES and Dragon Quest 5 and 6 on SNES. Like, the DS version's just better. Just play those ones. Which, you know, is a little sad, because then it's like, well, those other versions don't have any reason to exist now.
It is a little dicier when you're dealing with a game that's quite that old, because games that were that old, I'm talking 8-bit old and floppy disk old, have so little room within their own hardware and storage media to actually do what they were trying to do, that any modern remake is inevitably going to be way bigger and way meatier and way more content rich.
Yeah, especially, like, Dragon Quest IV is a big example of that, because for people who don't know, Dragon Quest IV had the Persona 3 thing where all of your party members won't listen to you and just do whatever the hell they want. But instead of having crappy PS2 AI for your party members, you have even crappier NES AI for your party members. So you have things like your cleric has a strange bit of logic that will have it continuously cast instant death spells on bosses that are immune to it instead of healing your party members, which is what he's supposed to be doing.
Marin fucking Karen.
Yeah, this Kirill's insistent use of thwacking bosses is so legendarily bad AI that it's become a running joke in the franchise, and his super move in most of the spin-offs is him trying to cast instant death on an enemy. It's not working, and he gets so frustrated that he breaks the user interface and does an even bigger instant death spell that does a bajillion damage. So in cases like that, a remake is definitely warranted, so that the game works.
All that reminds me of is in original Pokemon Red and Blue, where the AI will just go purely on typing, even if it doesn't do anything. Like, we're going to use a Psychic type move. The only Psychic type move we have is Agility.
Oh, yeah, so I think you can beat Lance's Dragonite with just as like a level 2 Zubat.
Yeah, because he just spams agility
over and over again. Yeah. Oh man, there's a lot of really like silly Pokemon challenge runs based off of the fact that Pokemon was programmed using a TI-89 and a pack of gum.
So the TI-89 is probably more powerful than the Game Boy.
Probably, yeah.
Well, I mean, the computer you use to program a game is always going to be more powerful than the hardware you're making it for.
Yeah.
No, we're talking about the calculator being more powerful than the Game Boy, because the Game Boy came out in '89.
Well, I mean, the TI-89, I think, came out in, like, the 70s, and they're still making students pay several $100s for them, because Texas Instruments has a monopoly on it, and I'm sorry, I have extreme feelings about this.
I saw the rant coming a mile away when the TI-89 was mentioned.
Yeah,
because
we've done this before, but
I'm still mad about it.
We can't mention calculators without mentioning Texas Instruments, and you know what? That is as it should be, because no one is mentioning Texas Instruments, and they deserve to be chewed out. Come on, but like,
hey, babe. You know, I'm like Texas Instruments because I'm the only choice on the block. And that's why I don't get the ladies.
That's the, you know, if you were trying to get a date in like science lab at like advanced placement college, that might actually work.
No, they're smart. No, because they're all smarter than to fall for that.
No, it would work on the same level that the bingo line from Resident Evil 4 works, as in both people know it was a stupid line and they just laugh at how stupid it is.
Oh, how bad at picking up girls is Leon in the remake? Is he just as bad?
Well, that's one thing they didn't really bring back, is that he doesn't really hit on anyone. Like he doesn't. They took out that stupid ass aspect where they can see each other's faces through their headset walkie-talkie somehow. So like, even though there's like a little video window showing the person talking at the bottom of the screen, they don't actually see each other. So Leon can't really comment on Hunnigan's appearance. And the relationship between him and Ashley is a lot more wholesome and developed. So by the end of the game, that's like,
better, because he's like twice her age and also like her bodyguard, so it's a little less creepy.
He's not that much older than she is.
He never hit on Ashley in the original game. Ashley hit on him.
Isn't Ashley like 17?
She's 21. College. She's college.
Oh, okay. And he's like almost 30-ish. So okay. So that's
it's not that squicky.
No, it's not. Yeah, especially if she's hitting on him, that's not that weird.
It was, but it's like one of the best things about the remake is that Leon's relationship with Ashley and Ashley's relationship with him is more of a game-long arc than just. Good. So yeah, I really enjoyed it. Anyway, part's over. We'll see you next time.